A reading from the book of Sirach. Wrath and anger are hateful things, yet the sinner hugs them tight. The vengeful will suffer the Lord's vengeance, for he remembers their sins in detail. Forgive your neighbor's injustice, then when you pray, your own sins will be forgiven. Could anyone nourish anger against another and expect healing from the Lord? Could anyone refuse mercy to another like himself? Can he seek pardon for his own sins? If one who is but flesh cherishes wrath, who will forgive his sins? Remember your last days. Set enmity aside. Remember death and decay, and cease from sin. Think of the commandments. Hate not your neighbor. Remember the Most High's covenant, and overlook faults. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
I remember last fall, about a year ago, seeing a video of a young man named Brant Jean. Brant's brother, Botham, an African-American man, was shot and killed in his apartment by an off-duty white police officer. The officer was charged with murder and was sentenced to prison. At the end of the trial and after the sentencing, Brant asked if he could make a statement, and his statement was the video I watched. He took the stand and he looked directly into the eyes of the woman who had killed his brother. And he said, "I forgive you, and I know that if you ask God, He will forgive you." Brant was then given permission, and he embraced his brother's killer. After seeing this, I was silent for a while, and I thought to myself, how is it possible to do something like this while experiencing so much pain and grief in the face of such a grave injustice? The reading tells us to forgive our neighbor's injustices, but what Brant did seemed superhuman. I realized, however, that heroic acts of forgiveness such as this do not come from nowhere. We do not wake up with the ability to forgive those who have hurt us most deeply. Rather, these moments of heroic forgiveness are the result of a decision through grace to cultivate forgiveness in our lives. This forgiving act was not something that Brant simply decided to do. It is who he was. The question for us, those of us who may not have had this dramatic experience of forgiveness, the question is not, what would I have done, or how is this possible? But rather, how do I cultivate forgiveness in my daily life? Lest we think that we do not have many opportunities to exercise forgiveness, Pope Francis, in the book that the student brothers are currently reading, reminds us we wrong each other every day. So the first step to integrating forgiveness in our lives is to recognize those moments every day in which we are called to forgive. It could be as small as forgiving the brother who leaves the toaster covered in crumbs, or the person who made a backhanded comment to us without realizing how it wounded us. Or maybe it's simply forgiving the person who isn't listening to us when we need them to be. The point is that forgiveness takes root in the small things, and it's not reserved for the most grievous offenses. The second step in cultivating forgiveness comes to us from the reading from Sirach. We are reminded to constantly remember. Remember our death. Remember our last days, and to remember our covenant with God. This remembrance, this contemplation, reorients us towards God and toward our neighbors. It reminds us that we have been forgiven by God. It reminds us of who we are as created in God's image and likeness. so that when faced with the decision between malice and forgiveness, we choose as children of God. Forgiveness, Sirach tells us, is a fruit of our contemplation. Forgiveness begins in contemplation. As Dominicans, our contemplation does not end in abstract truths or momentary bliss. It is actualized in the decisions we make and how we live our lives. Pope Francis says that the act of daily forgiveness does not need to be dramatic. There is no need to make a long speech, he says. It is simply a matter of asking for the grace to forgive someone's wrongdoing and for God to remove the resentment from our hearts. For us, this means maybe that we just don't end the day with a backlog of bitterness and anger. For somebody like Brant, it meant being free from the burden of hating his brother's killer. In both cases, great and small, it is God's grace that makes us remember who we are and to act on it. The world today, brothers, is in need of heroic moments of forgiveness and reconciliation, and it's tempting to think that these are not possible. But it does not require one single great moment of mercy. It requires many lives completely given to Christ, completely given to forgiving as we have been forgiven. This is how we are called to be witnesses to the world, by being reconciled to God and reconciled to one another.